It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
So might I say, Mr. Speaker, to the right honourable gentleman, that this is in stark contrast to the negligent, shameful horror of a circus performance that the Conservative Party unleashed on this country when they were in government a few years ago. And until he can come to this House with an apology for the British people, I will not take any lectures from the Conservative Party about how to run the economy.
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the icicle to the avalanche of politics that is our main Thursday show. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. I'm Naomi.
And I'm Alex.
Alex, I wanted to take this opportunity to, as I'm sure you do, to thank all the people who showed up for our Friday lunchtime Ask Us Anything session. And as ever, those sessions are fun, but this one was particularly fun. And it was so lovely to see everybody's gorgeous faces. Some people brought their dogs to show us. And it was huge fun. And it really bonds us to our audience. And because of that, improves our content. It was just magical. Thank you, everyone.
I feel that, we're becoming a kind of family, a kind of gang. And
friends, man. We're making loads of new friends through this.
It was nice to have lunch with them, actually.
Exactly. Yeah.
Julia sent me a lovely message saying, I hope I didn't offend you by having my boiled eggs.
Oh, not at all.
On camera. And I was like, no, the opposite. I meant exactly what I said. It felt like we were sharing lunch. It was really lovely.
Like a paper bag session. It was great.
So we will be announcing the next Ask Us Anything session soon, probably for late February. But before that, we have our quarterly big editorial meeting coming up on Sunday, the 26th of this month. That is where we discuss everything: format, length, frequency, features, topics, guests. Everything is up for grabs.
We'll make all of our content free to everyone, as we've always said. And in fact, we've just hit 1 million downloads at the latest count, which is far beyond our expectations when we set the show up for this point in time. We thought it would take us quite a bit longer to get there. And so these kinds of sessions and making sure that we are including the people that have backed us financially because they're able to do so is our way to express gratitude. And it helps us because their input into co-creating the show really does make a big difference. But just to reiterate, to those that can't afford to do that, that doesn't mean that you won't get every podcast we put out free of charge.
And at the same time, which is also important. So if you want to help us do what we do, please sign up to make a monthly contribution on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. If you feel you're getting good value, then please help make it more sustainable long term. Now, Naomi, on with the mottling. What are we talking about today?
Well, I hoovered up your episode with Vicky Price on the markets, what they're doing, why they're doing it.
Oh, and you have feelings, do you?
I do, and I really want us to get into the politics of it. You did a great job at the economics, but maybe today we can spend a bit of time talking about the political implication for the government of all of that. What about you? What do you want to focus on?
I want to talk about Trump's conviction. Sunday has become a way to talk about things I feel ambivalent about with you, because it helps clarify them in my head, I think. And I am ambivalent about this one because I've seen a lot of people saying what a disgrace, the fact he didn't get a jail sentence or whatever. And I wanted to talk about it.
I'd also, if we've got time, like to talk about the revolt happening within Reform UK. it feels funny on the surface and we all need a giggle, but there's probably some serious stuff to unpick with it all as well. So if we get time, let's bolt that on at the end. Quiet Riot. Now, Alex, as said, I really enjoyed the mini-cast with economist Vicky Pryce on Friday, not least because I completely agree with you how frustrating broadcast media on the topic is. Snippets of expert intervention here and there, and then moving on to the next news item. So it was so good to get that deep dive and really get my head around it all. Listeners, go back and hoover that episode up if you've not already, and then dive back in here. The relatively modest growth targets that the OBR had set out for the country are almost certainly going to be revised down by the OBR in March off the back of everything that's been happening recently, Alex. And you know that I certainly didn't see any real growth prospect from the Reeves autumn budget. Is it sort of fundamentally dishonest of the government to be talking about how much they're prioritising growth when they're actually doing very little to drive it? Or am I being unfair?
No, I don't think you're being unfair, but there's something I have to say as a caveat before that. I think making assumptions about what the OBR will do in March is a bit premature, and I'll tell you why. Because, and this is something we saw actually around Trump's first inauguration, he threatens loads of stuff to manipulate markets.
And doesn't do it.
In order to scare them, make them jittery, drive everything down. And then he gets inaugurated and comes in and says different things about tariffs and takes a much more pragmatic approach to A, B, and C. And what happens is markets then shoot up. And he comes out and says, look, even in my first week as president, look at Wall Street going gangbusters, look at all the indicators going up. So he did this before. There's nothing to say he's not doing exactly that again. So he's setting up the markets to have a really volatile diving period so he can come in and be the savior because he loves doing that. So that's my little caveat. Let's not jump forward too much. Now, on growth, so we have a particular view on Brexit and Europe, but there is no doubt that it is the lowest hanging fruit growth-wise. And I'm not talking about rejoin or single market or customs union, because people who make those kinds of suggestions seem to believe that all we need to do is indicate that we want to get back into the single market and Europe will say, welcome, welcome. And we know that's not the case, right? This will be something that takes a long time and a lot of trust building. But there are unilateral things that we can do right now that would boost the economy.
There certainly are.
And the reason this government is not doing them is because they're chicken. I'm sorry. They are letting the perceived political price of being seen to get closer to Europe dictate their policy choices when they know what's right to do. And I think that is a discredit to them. It is a discredit specifically to Rachel Reeves, who, according to all reports, is one of the main culprits in this. And I know why they're doing it. You know, they're doing it ahead of the local election so that a narrative is not created that, reform, you know, they've got momentum or whatever. But at the same time, you know, these months that are being lost, you ain't getting them back.
No. And the business confidence effect of it is real. There are so many organizations around the country that are struggling right now, particularly small and medium-sized organizations who employ the majority of British people. Most of us do not work for a large corporation that can box and cox around regulatory changes in our largest trading market. We've talked briefly on the show about things like GPSR, which is the General Product Safety Regulation that the EU has brought in, which is now making it almost impossible for smaller sellers to sell into the European Union market. We've seen lots and lots of sole traders say that I just can't do it. You now have to have an EU-based representative in order to sell and meet that. And what this is an example of divergence. And at Best for Britain, what we've always campaigned for is alignment. And the government needs to pursue a policy of dynamic, beneficial alignment with the European Union. And you're right. I know that the vast majority of members around the cabinet table want this and would like to be pursuing it. But there is, another voice around that table, or more than one voice, acting as a brake on all of that. And potentially also within Number 10, with some people very focused on campaigns. And you mentioned the local election and that narrative. But the government are running out of options, of the levers that they can pull. And the compound effect of not giving business the certainty about the regulatory environment in which they need to operate means that they will act rationally and stop trading with Europe. And you can't then just suddenly start trading with other countries. Trade declines with distance, geography matters. We don't actually have that many free trade agreements with other countries that want to buy the kinds of things we produce. And I think the politics of this is very, very interesting. There has been some mutterings about the tension between the Treasury and Number 10 on this. Robert Shrimsley in the FT had a very good piece reminding us that it is the Prime Minister and not the Chancellor who is ultimately First Lord of the Treasury. And Shrimsley thinks he's delegated too much decision-making power to Reeves, and it's time for him to intervene. He says this is not about undermining or breaking with Reeves, but a more active use of the role of Prime Minister to cajole, challenge and demand more. I think he's right. And, he was much more pro-European than she was. He obviously represented a constituency that was much more in favour of Europe than she does. But ultimately, we need growth. They say they want growth, but they're not doing the one thing they could do to turn that on. And it wouldn't even be turning it on and getting a quick gain. Nothing really gets you it very, very quickly. But the longer you leave it, the longer it's going to take for any of that to come through. So there is something happening in Parliament on Wednesday that I really want listeners to know about. And there's a 10-minute rule debate on a youth mobility scheme. Regular listeners will know about youth mobility schemes. The UK has them already with 13 other countries, and the EU would really quite like one with the UK to allow young people to live, work, study across 27 EU countries and the UK much more easily. They want that, and we need to offer them a carrot in order to get the things that we would like from a review of the Brexit deal. So we're going to drop a link in the show notes for people to, at a click of a button, tell their MP, turn up to this debate and hear it. Why that's important is not because the 10-minute rule bill has any likelihood of ever getting on the statute book, but to show parliamentarians the strength of support there is across the country for a closer relationship with Europe. And one of those closer things would be a youth mobility scheme.
And the point is, they will get the political heat anyway. It is now entirely clear that there is a rump of press that are going to go at this government, whatever it does, right? There were stories about Morgan McSweeney having secret meetings with EU. The appointment of Ollie Robbins has been made into a huge thing, apparently an indication that Starmer is about to betray Brexit. So what I'm trying to say is that the people for whom Brexit betrayal is a favorite hobby horse will find ways of making that the front page anyway.
No matter
you really
what
gain
they do.
nothing by being a wuss policy-wise, because the story will be manufactured in any case. On this manufacturing of stories, which was one of my beefs in that episode with Vicky Price, I wanted to pick out this tweet by Stephen Swinford
of the Times.
In the Times, a respectable journalist at a respectable publication, who tweeted on Friday mid-afternoon, a really strange thing for someone to do on financial markets, since they always make adjustments on Friday afternoon. So he tweeted saying, it's a grim afternoon for the economy on multiple fronts. Traders now pricing in just one interest rate cut this year. The cost of government borrowing has risen to the highest level in 30 years for the third day in a row. The pound has again slumped to a 14-month low against the dollar in the wake of stronger than expected jobs data. The price of oil has risen to its highest level since October. And I wanted to break that down a little bit, okay? So the pound was worth 1.2269 US dollars at the open and 1.2208 at the close. The UK 30-year bond rate was 5.412% first thing and was 5.410 at the close. It had actually gone down a tiny bit. 10-year gilts were similar. I mean, this was a static day, if anything. Would it have been good to see the pound climb a bit? Of course. But to describe this in terms of a third day in a row, 30-year high, 14-month low. And the last statement, the price of oil has risen to its highest level since October. That's 3 fucking months ago. What are you talking about? Like, how is that a sign of the economy being in trouble? It was literally as high just before the American election. And it's now the dead of winter in a particularly cold winter. And you're pointing to the price of oil going up as some sign that the UK economy in particular is in trouble. I think there is a tendency for journalists high on memories of Partygate and the Liz Truss mini budget to create these crisis narratives. They're just not real. You know, what is going on in the markets right now is a real big problem that could turn into a crisis. But is it a crisis? Absolutely no, it's not. Is it something that was worth cancelling a trip to China by the Chancellor? Absolutely not. And I disagreed with Vicky on this, because that would create a sense of crisis. The Chancellor cancelling a long-planned trip to China to stay here because market is a bit volatile would feed into that sense that there is a crisis.
One thing, though, I would like to talk about with the China trip is who Rachel Reeves is taking with her. Because as I understand it, I'm sure I read it somewhere, I can't find it now, she's taking quite a lot of financial institutions with her. When we look at what the British Chambers of Commerce and the Federation of Small Businesses are saying, they are signalling pain, and the BCC had a survey, as they do a regular survey of their membership. And a majority of firms are expecting price rises because of the cost of labour linked to the national insurance contributions going up. 63% say all of those taxes and the budget are a cause for concern. That's the highest level recorded since 2017, so a very long time ago now. That confidence has slipped, investment is down, conditions are weak, very few of them reporting increased cash flow, etc. So I do hope that the Treasury are listening very closely to industry and business, not simply financial services, which of course are an incredibly important part of our economy and huge in value terms. But the people that are actually going to be building the homes that Angela Rayner is hoping to deliver, the organisations that can provide jobs and injections of growth into the economy, are the ones that are struggling. It's rare that we'll ever need to feel sorry for the banks.
I will push very gently against that, only to say that the finance sector is a lot wider and broader than just top banks and traders in
hedge funds
in London. You know, there's an estimate of just under 1 million people work in the finance sector all over the country, actually. So I think it is slightly more interconnected than that. I do agree that taking just bankers with you is the wrong signal, but it's probably because I think the government senses there's an opportunity there, you know, because China is being really blocked out regulation-wise from American financial institutions and European financial institutions in terms of where they do their listings, where they use financial services, what they put their money through. And they probably sense there is an opportunity there for a quick gain. And I suspect that's what's going on. The bigger picture is that those advocating that we should hug America closely, this is a strategic error because Trump hates China and we don't want to piss off Trump. The truth is that Trump has an entirely America first protectionist agenda, and you can hug them as close as you want. He ain't going to give you a deal. He ain't going to give you a break of any sort, just like he didn't last time. That means we do need to develop stronger links to both Europe and urgently, but
and
also
other
to China. That's, that's another really big market. So.
Quiet Riot.
Will, talk to me.
ABC Tuesday.
They took his daughter. She's coming home alive.
Will Trent, the series critics are calling powerful must-see TV, continues to thrill.
Shouldn't we strategize before we go in there?
If we screw up this case, a cop killer walks free.
With the riveting conclusion to a 2-part season premiere.
GBI!
Help me!
Get down!
Will Trent, all new Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Quiet Riot.
Now, on Friday, Trump was criminally convicted and sentenced in a New York court at the end of his hush money trial. The sentence imposed by Judge Juan Merchan was unconditional discharge, so basically nothing. This was a bit of an anticlimax for many who have criticized the judge and wanted to see something harsher, who complain of sort of a different standard of justice. However, it does mean that Trump will be sworn into the presidency a convicted felon. And I think the symbolism of that is important. Where are you on this, Naomi?
Well, I mean, look, my main place of where I am is that this was never the case on which he should have been sentenced. It should have been January 6th.
Yeah.
So the anticlimax for me came long before. Of all of his many, many misdemeanors, the January 6th one was by far the most serious and the one that they should have got him on. And so I think where they've ended up is in a place where the minimal sentence of unconditional discharge keeps MAGA happy because he's not going to do jail time, but does ensure that the trial's finality in respect of the verdict of convicting him did have some conclusion and doesn't then interfere with his ability to govern. So, I guess...
Or alternatively, it makes everyone unhappy.
Well, yeah. But yeah. I'm sure he's happy to be inaugurated on the 20th of January in person rather than behind bars. So... In the first section of this show, we were talking a bit about the state of the US economy, and obviously it has been performing relatively well. But the cost of the LA fires, I read, were, beginning to total like over 130 billion. Will that have a material impact on the US economy? And could we sort of see now, as a consequence of this, a more difficult economic inheritance for Trump than the one he was hoping for?
I mean, possibly a positive one, Naomi, and that is the perversity of how we count GDP, of what we consider success, of, the old thing that Robert Kennedy used to point out. We count as part of our success how many jails we build and how many locks we have on our doors and how many guns we buy, when actually those things are a sign of failure. So actually all of that needing to be rebuilt, and the federal money that will flow in to help with that effort might make a positive effect. Although, flip side of that might be an inflationary effect on the US economy. And actually the thing markets are jittery around the world more than anything is inflation kicking back up in the United States, which means slower interest rate cuts by the Fed, which means slower interest rate cuts around the world.
And a testament to how interconnected we are with the global financial markets. There's been a lot of talk about the insurance companies failing people in LA and revoking their insurance just before the fire broke out, and many of them obviously doing that since. And now the cost of insurance will skyrocket in many places in the US. Now, of course, what insurance companies do is they resell the insurance globally. So the insurance companies will be able to pay out because they have already reinsured themselves, and that will therefore have an impact on insurance costs around the world. So I think you're right to mention the inflationary impact of it. So getting back to Trump and his legal argument, you, I think, have a clip for us that's pretty interesting.
It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes, and they've been watching your trial.
And I think that's the crux of it, right? And the judge responded, I think, in a very elegant way by saying, and I quote, "The protections of the presidency are a legal mandate which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections," and I think he's referring to the recent Supreme Court decision that anything you do while president is basically A-OK, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. I don't think I am on board with those criticizing the judge. I think the judge had very limited options, all of which would have terrible repercussions in some ways, and has found quite an elegant path that does the least amount of damage on all fronts. Trump, as we heard, will claim victimhood anyway. The voters' jury has acquitted him. He actually also made an argument, which I found extraordinary, that while Los Angeles is burning and there are wars going on in the world, why are you wasting the incoming president's time with this stuff? Which I found quite incredible. Like, can't you just forget my past crimes for which there's already been a verdict, considering I'm a very busy man?
And also, the case was delayed until after.
Yeah.
Well, not the case, but the sentencing was delayed until after the election. They did everything they could to try and, not interfere with that democratic process.
And I think it would have been very easy for the judge to actually take one of the delays that Trump's team was trying to get and not have to do this at all. So I think the judge was actually quite brave, pressing on with the sentencing hearing 10 days before inauguration. It's a difficult one. And it's a little taster of what we're about to get. It's going to be 4 years of instability and bullshit. Those of us that were around and politically involved in 2016 will remember what it was like to wake up in the morning and just log on to the news or social media and think, oh, Christ, see his name trending and think, oh, what's he said now?
And now we've got Musk doing middle of the night tweets as well.
Middle of the night, end of the night, beginning of the night, middle of the day. There's very little sleep going on, which does make me quite suspicious about whether there's chemical assistance there. There was someone, I think, that did a sort of time-lapse video of all his tweets during a period, and he did like 18 hours straight of just manically tweeting about the UK specifically and the grooming gangs. Well, he's not a well guy.
Quiet Riot.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity, health, and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Quiet riot.
Now, Alex, as much as I'd love to ignore Nigel Farage, we can't ignore the pressure he's under internally. The reformers, they are revolting.
In all sorts of ways.
Fueled by Musk's intervention saying that Farage should go, I think 10 or maybe even a dozen reform councillors have now resigned.
Well, they've given notice they will resign, which is quite interesting in itself, isn't it?
And it seems that there are two driving factors. One, Farage's running of the party, very few democratic processes yet within it. Private company owned by him, not yet shifted over to full political party status. They, I think, have cited the expulsion of people like Ben Habib as a signal that this is a, dictator, authoritarian figure who isn't tolerating different views of opinion from within the party. And then the second, linked more, I think, to Musk's intervention, is Farage's lack of support for Tommy Robinson.
Well, Mr. Habib's been gone since the election, and good riddance. As far as the councillors are concerned, they're nearly all parish councillors. And actually, the truth is that none of them passed vetting. We had a rogue branch putting people up. And I think you will find in many cases there'll have to be by-elections because they weren't legitimately put forward. And as for Elon, well, he changes his mind. He said what he said. We had a disagreement. But you know what? Since then, he's retweeted me several times. I don't think there's any long-term rift with Elon Musk at all.
Now, I have canvassed a lot in this country over a very, very long period of time. I've been door knocking for 25 years in this country in all sorts of different elections all over the country. So I am familiar with the breadth of people who have been attracted to, supportive of, and voters of, and members of UKIP, Brexit Party, and Reform UK. And while they are wide-ranging, there are an enormous number of them who are what I would call the kind of red corduroy trouser guy who is aspirationally wealthy, loves playing golf. They would not want Tommy Robinson riffraff in their golf clubs. They do not like the working classness of a man like Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, and they don't want that infiltrating their club.
And I think that's true of Farage.
And I think that's true of Farage. But because the party has grown and has broadened its appeal and capitalised on anti-immigration sentiment within all classes across, socioeconomic classes across the UK, they do now have more members and therefore elected representatives who don't share those values and don't particularly like the toffee, golf club members of the old UKIP. So it doesn't surprise me that this is happening. What's your hunch about whether or not this is good, bad, or indifferent for Farage?
I mean, it's a fork on the road, is what it is. I agree with you completely. I think there's a very particular type that is actually very old-fashioned Tory. Farage just wants to be a country gent that is allowed to go hunting and occasionally pinch the maid's bottom and whip the servants. That's what they want. He doesn't want common oiks, as he might see them, like Tommy Robinson getting ideas above their station. He wants them to tug at their forelock and do as they're told. And so there are two different ways, I think, for reform to grow at the moment. One is to further cannibalize the Conservative vote, which is Farage's way and Farage's natural inclination. I think he's a Thatcherite.
It's the party he grew up in.
Yeah.
He knows them inside out.
And the other is to go for the disenfranchised, people who feel outside of the political system. That was activated to a large extent by Brexit and did help Brexit over the line. Not necessarily entirely on the right, I have to say. I have seen increasing numbers of accounts on social media that do seem to me to amplify a smorgasbord of views, including MAGA, Musk, Farage, Owen Jones, George Galloway, and I think there are a lot of votes there. The question is it easier to energize those who don't normally vote to vote for you in large enough numbers to overtake the traditional Conservative Party? Or is it easier
in a critical mass area that is, you can get a large national vote share, but under our system, unless you're getting that consolidated in the right constituencies, it ain't delivering political fortune?
Or is it easier to try and pick off the people that go out and vote election after election? My instinct is that the latter is easier. My political experience, I think, of the last 20 years is that whenever you find yourself relying on fictional voters who may be out there and may vote for you, you're screwed. Much easier to convert real voters to your side. And not only that, they count double, you know?
Because they're taking a bit away.
It's like when you're playing a team that's also in trouble in the relegation zone. That kind of victory, converting a Tory voter over to your side, not only adds one to you, but takes one away from them.
Indeed.
And so I think that's the smartest strategy. It pains me to say it, but I think Farage knows what he's doing. This may even turn out to be quite helpful for Farage. It helps him. It sanitizes him. It helps him place Reform onto the board as a kind of more moderate party. And it's actually the Conservatives that seem to are developing tendencies towards that slightly more fringe element on the far right, which I think is astonishingly tin-eared and idiotic.
There was a poll out this week, probably an outlier, but nonetheless worth noting from Find Out Now, of 2,000 people. The changes are based on a poll from the 11th of December. This was done on the 8th of January. Labour 25, Reform 25, Conservatives 20, Greens and Lib Dems neck and neck on 11. Possibly an outlier, but certainly one that would, I think, give credence to your description of going after those Tory votes, because the Tories are down 3 in that poll, and that it is a swing straight to the Reform.
I think it is an outlier. We've seen other polls this week, More in Common being another one that show the opposite, as it were. In any case, I'm not sure of the value of this kind of voting intention polling
at this stage. No.
Out of an election. I mean, I think it's just fodder for newspapers to say what they want to say anyway. They will latch on to particular data and particular polls. And I do think that the closer we get to the local election, which might turn out to be a big protest election against Labour, the more people will have that in the forefront of their mind. So when you ask them, what's your voting intention, even though you're asking them at a general election, possibly in 5 years' time, they will actually be telling you how they plan to vote at the local election, whether they know it or not. It's just how we work, how our thinking works. And as I said, Reform has no record, but Brexit Party before it and UKIP before it, they have a history of doing very, very well in midterm elections as a party of protest. And that should not be ignored, but it should be put in its proper context.
Yeah, I agree.
So it will be interesting to see what happens there with those councillors threatening to resign, because not all of them are nobodies. One of them is a man called Alex Stevenson, who came second at the general election in the constituency of Amber Valley with 28% of the vote. And so it would be interesting to see if that has an effect on the polls, actually, if that schism develops further and there begin to be mutterings of Farage not being up to it and people latching on to Musk. Musk, by the way, who is retweeting Ben Habib at the moment. That's also interesting. Anyway.
Well,
Sorry.
the Rupert Lowe was funny. You did a very good tweet from Best for Britain. He stood up in the chamber in the House of Commons and made an embarrassment of himself and Speaker Lindsay Hoyle.
I mean, all he had to do was list his 5 MPs,
and then forgot his own party leader's name.
Naomi, that was much condensed. I have to tell you, this went on for 12 minutes.
Well, let's leave a link in the show notes so people can go and watch.
Oh yeah, I will do. It's really fun. And with that, my darling Naomi, we bring things to a close for this week's Sunday School. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, our editorial meeting with our Ko-fi backers is scheduled for the end of January. So there's still time to sign up as a monthly contributor if you'd like to attend that.
Yep, so head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod to sign up, and you'll get an email with details of how to join our Discord channel, and we'll then be able to send you links to join the online editorial. And as Alex said, we're holding it on a Sunday this time, based on listener feedback, to give people who have evening jobs or family commitments the ability to join one of our sessions. So going forward, we'll mix up the dates and times to see what works best for people and to give everybody a chance to join in.
Exactly. You can basically join the editorial meeting either after or before listening to your regular Sunday school. So we'll be back as ever with the main show this Thursday with a focus on Labour's first 200 days in government. How time flies.
So goodbye for now. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And remember, we love you lots.
Lots and lots. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Oh, by the way, I was going to tell you, every time I was editing, and this must have been really weird for you, I don't know why you didn't say anything, I kept hearing shh occasionally. You must have heard it.
No.
Shh, shh. Maybe it was just recorded locally on mine and it's filtered away from yours.
Did you figure out what it was? Was one of the cats doing a shit?
No, it was that because the mouse is on my right hand, it's right underneath the microphone. So every time I moved the mouse to do something, there was a kind of shh.